Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Cat's Eye on the Future. As I mentioned in my update post on my blog, there's a few changes going on here at the radio show, and mostly they relate to simply the revival of the show. For about the last 8 months, Time Monk Radio has been in suspension, and we've now under new management, and so it's time that we can start recording again. For the time being, I'm probably just going to have the show a couple of times a month, and I'll try to start with a card overview each at the beginning or towards the beginning of each month, and then probably either a topical show or an interview later in the month. At the end of the year, we can evaluate things, see how it's going, see how time's going, see how the network is going, and maybe increase things a bit. But for now, I think 2 times a month is fun. And it should be interesting to compare how the overall energies for a longer period of time interact with the shorter term energies that I'll be reading on the blog. So the blog will stay card of the week rather than, for a long time it was card of the day, and that just got to be too much. So lately I've been doing cards of the week. And I'll also be doing, at the start of the month, a cards of the month. This month, of course, it's a bit late. And I'm also going to be gone on the weekend of the 17th. I'll be out of the country. So this month, the September reading kind of goes through, is the mid-month, and it's going September, and the energies will probably flow into October. But I hope to get at least one more weekly reading in before September is over, and then hopefully in October we can start with the special reading at the beginning, and the other things later on the cards of the week. And we can watch and see how the overall energies of the month interact with the shorter term energies of each week for those who are actually reading the blog. Now, to encourage people to listen to the show, I've also done a special short reading on one of the topics that comes up in the overall energies, and some questions and updates from individuals on forums that I frequent about the post of the monthly cards, which I actually put up about 4 or 5 days ago. And each month I hope to add a bit of additional information, even on the first of the month show, so that listeners actually get something for listening rather than me just reading the blog out loud. I will attempt not to do that, although a lot of the information will be the same. And there probably will usually be a couple of days lag time, so if you read the blog, first, you can feel free to ask me questions, melodyreader@gmail.com, and I might be able to use some of them on the air when I actually look at things and get ready to actually record the show. But for now, I want to go ahead, because I've got a lot of material. This was a really jam-packed month. I want to look at the overall energies for the month of September and how they're most likely to influence current events and some personal stuff as well. We'll get into that more later. Now, the card of the month was very interesting. This is the overall providing energy that sort of drives everything. And that card is the Psi card, Work. Work is a card with gears and cogs and wheels on it, and it can mean a lot of things, but its primary meaning is usually mundane jobs and work, especially in a current events reading. Of course, work can also be about spiritual growth, spiritual work, or working on a particular problem. There are a lot of, like all the cards, there's a lot of sub-meanings here too. But taking all the cards and the eventual runes together, which we're going to do as we go along here, the most obvious conclusion I can draw is that as an overall macro sense, the idea and the concept of work, jobs, employment, labor, management, even things like commuting or factory building, overall business, and even international trade and treaties are all going to be very important and highlighted this month. Pretty much anything that affects getting the work done, or employment, or perhaps unemployment, is going to be a big theme this month. We're already seeing this both on a local and an international level. I mean, we have, in Ireland, we have a bus driver's strike over pay and working conditions. And then we have public relations against the, people very much upset about American, European, or Trans-Pacific Partnership treaties between the U.S. and bigger blocs of nations. And the media is highlighting the loss of 80,000 jobs in the coal industry in the U.S. since 2008. That's exactly the kind of story we would expect to see during this period. Jobs, employment, and commerce are already huge and ongoing stories as we go into the second and third week of September. So the energies were already there. They're just continuing. Now, the individual side cards, and to do these, I actually put the work card back. The work card did not show up a second time this month, but it can. It didn't, but it has in the past, so all the cards are once again put in the deck. And this month I got 4 side cards, because usually I read 3, but the first 2 cards were stuck together. In fact, they were so stuck together, I didn't even notice them that there was a second one, until I'd done the whole layout and was getting ready to read. Now, usually when 2 cards do this, or an extra rune slips into my hand or falls on the floor, I try to go ahead and put them in the reading anyway, because I figure there's a good reason that they're there. And this time, that sure proved to be the case. Okay, first off, what are the cards? Well, the first side card is the tree. Now, this card has a picture of a tree on it with roots going into the ground and leaves up in the sky. And this card is like all about putting down roots or being firmly stood in place. It can also represent the roots of the problem or some issue. And it's also about, growing a strong tree and having many branches. Like in a personal reading, it often suggests the client is looking for a stable situation, a home base, or a career that's steady. It can also be about making personal connections and not being tossed about by the winds of fortune or the opinions of others. The tree can also be about connections, like a family tree, which could be the original source from which a situation, a person, a tribe, or a nation comes from. You can see that when you look at like the tree of life or the tree of evolution or a family tree, or even languages. They all branch out from a trunk whose roots may not show above the surface very much, but they're there. There is a starting point. With work being the overall energy this month, my hunch is the tree is all about the roots of the issues here. Finding the real cause or attempting to deal with real causes of both employment and unemployment, jobs in general. Also about projects that may have been started or projects left undone. Again, work both finished and work left unfinished. This tree card also shows the idea that everything may stem from the same original source, but now the situations have branched out and become many-faceted. So they may appear to be separate things, but in reality they're still connected at the base. Now, the card that was connected to this card, underneath it, hiding, was the puzzle card. This card is very important, for the puzzle is always about a decision which must be made. It's a decision that can't be avoided. The card itself shows 2 doors with a thorny hedge around them. One door or the other must be opened, and the other left closed forever. It's a choice. It's a dualistic choice between 2 decisions. And not making a decision is also a decision, because nothing will go forward or progress until the decision is made. Hence we know that there is a decision which will have to be made in the world. It'll be very soon, and it will affect the tree. And in this reading, I'm thinking more of the tree in terms of the world tree, the whole world. So think of it as affecting the world, and probably, in this case, the world of work, though I think it will affect other things as well. Once this decision point is either made or simply fallen into because the will to actually make a decision does not occur, either way, the next card is death, which usually means massive change and potential disruption on an epic scale. It's possible. Doesn't mean it will always work out that way, but it's possible, as is actual human deaths of people in a current ignorance reading, or at least extreme transformations. Usually the death card is not about actual physical death, but when we're reading about current events, of course it can be the death of people, but it can also be the death of things or ideas or situations, which will then transform into something else. No matter what decision is taken, this disruption, transformation, and final ending of something will occur. The only choices involved in this decision will be who or what is most directly affected first. The decision looks like it will affect jobs, employment, labor, business, treaties, commerce, and even some legal judgments. I'll give the reasons for that later on in the reading, but just accept it for now. Some of that is already showing up in the reading so far, and other parts will become clearer in a moment when I get there. The final card for the sign cards is the card that says now, and it gives us a time marker of sorts for this major decision or possible group of decisions. The card itself now suggests that a near-term or now situation is also showing a picture of the farmer harvesting grain in the fall of the year. So we can suggest pretty clearly the potential fallout from these choices will not only be made soon, but is likely to continue through the fall period. Being at least partly economic in nature, at least I so believe, looking at some of the other cards and runes, it would not surprise me if the focus on work and decisions has a further backlash in the economy or even the stock markets in October. That's kind of the traditional month for such events. I'm not necessarily predicting a stock market crash or something. Lots of people are, but that tends to happen every October if we get these predictions. But be aware that there may be some economic disruptions. But we'll have to wait a bit longer to check on that one. Meanwhile, some decisions and reaction to those decisions will be probably sooner rather than later. Now we move on to the Cat's Eye Tarot cards, which are the Nine of Cups, the Seven of Swords, and the Lover's card. These cards all work together to suggest an atmosphere of wishful thinking, driving action, deep sensuality, pleasure-seeking, which is the Nine of Cups, combined with sneaky behavior, powers issues, deception, a lot of personal power trips, a sense of dishonesty, and generally kind of bad behavior, which you see in the Seven of Swords. The Lover's card gives us both potential for strong romantic and sexual attractions being in the news, which could be a lot of fun, and we've already seen some of that with, we just recently had another celebrity breakup, and you'll also probably see things about marriages and just dating and all kinds of stuff. But we'll also have difficulties of staying focused, which I did that on purpose in this sentence, because let me read that again without interrupting myself. The Lover's card shows both the potential for strong romantic and sexual attractions being in the news, but also the difficulties of staying focused on the main relationship or the main topics. And the card even shows the tomcat on the Lover's card. He's looking outside, away from his chosen mate, thinking of straying. Not only sexually, but away from his main commitment to hearth and home. There's just going to be a lot of that kind of, if not necessarily everybody's going to act out on it, but that kind of sense of the grass may be greener somewhere else. The Lover's card can also hint at difficulties and tensions between the beliefs of the individual or household and that of the larger group. So again, we have this idea of potential tensions and disruptions between individuals or small groups and their belief systems and the belief systems of others or that of the larger culture. And yes, I'm talking about potential problems with the large migrations, folk migrations, both in the United States and particularly going on in Europe. And there are other things that will hint back to this that my husband pointed out, which we'll also see in the runes. So look for continued tensions there. This is a rather deep and complex morass of suggestive energies that we've got here on all three cards. And they lead me to conclude that there's going to be a lot of off-topic, off-the-cuff, and straying remarks and stories, not just here in my radio show, but all over the news for the rest of the month. You're going to get a lot of stuff and you're going to go, whoa, where did that come from? Why am I hearing about this? That doesn't connect to that. It's going to be a lot of that. Last month, in our card readings on the blog, which you can go back and look at Card of the Week, there was a lot of focus on sexual and relationship scandals being used to distract the public, and I think somewhat deliberately. I think this energy continues, but along with that, this month and early into October will be a tendency on the part of people and even nations to turn their hands towards individual choices that will seem to increase pleasure and power, but often at the expense of honesty or even being outright deceitful. In other words, people making choices for me or mine, and they may pretend that they're doing this for the good of, other people or society or whatever, but in reality, it's very much a personal, me first choice. And I think this is going to slip into politics particularly, although I think you will also see it on a lot of levels. There's also an aspect of the Nine of Cups as the cat at the food dish on the card isn't above stealing food that isn't meant for her. She has her own dish, but that won't keep her from, going for the cream on the table or the dog's dish that's up on the floor. So again, you have this kind of like, I'm going to get what's mine, and maybe not even more than what's mine. And on the Seven of Swords card, we have the picture of a cat who's a Himalayan who's actually backing up and spraying urine on the walls of her own house. She's marking territory as hers specifically, and she wants it smelling for the rest of the family so they know that it's hers and not theirs. And, it's really unpleasant for the other people, but she doesn't really care. It's probably not very pleasant for the other cats either, if there's more than one in the house. And such marking can be a cry for help, but it can also be a statement of, this is our place. I think the recent behavior of the Chinese towards the U.S. president and the name-calling towards the U.S. president by the president of the Philippine Islands are perfect examples of this September energy of me big cat, me spray my scent in the world and mark my territory energy. It's just kind of all over. And I just picked those two as examples. I mean, there are plenty of others. And then said those have already happened, but look for a lot of power plays and that kind of human version of marking behavior for the rest of this month. I think it's going to be combined to a degree with deceptive and even downright underhanded practices designed to conceal and distract from other seriously underlying issues, probably a lot of which, again, come back to work and employment, but not all of them. Again, given the overall energy for this month, a lot of this deception, potential for theft, attempts at power grabs, and all this other stuff may ultimately have their sources in this sort of hunt for jobs or the ideas of labor, business, and maybe what seems to be the best way forward for them, from the viewpoint of the country, corporation, or individual that's doing the marking and distracting. In other words, it's what they think may be the best solution for them or theirs, and they want to distract from any other points of view. I'm also getting a hunch that something about brands or branding may be an issue later in the month, perhaps an issue of copyright or other corporate tangles with the work card at play, sometimes over the production of various goods and services that will affect well-known brands. Now, actually, and interestingly enough, I actually wrote this about 24 hours ago, and in the meantime, there has now been a big story about the European High Court making rulings that may affect the ability of people and corporations or other groups to post stories, pictures, or information from other sources, which, nothing's been settled yet, but it is actually already in the cards. And this could easily affect a lot of things if these rulings are upheld, and if it, say, becomes impossible for me to mention a story directly or reprint something of it on my blog, because I could personally then become liable for copyright. This was tried several years ago, and it had a rather chilling effect on a lot of forums and things. But this is the first time it's actually been held up in a major court system in the world. So we'll have to see how that goes. And this may be part of that energy working itself out. Now, finally, we have the rune staves. And we start out with Gabo, which is usually translated marriage or gift. And it was another reason, along with the Lover's card, that I suggested the sexual and relationship focus will continue for this month. Some of that news will likely be positive and good, but my feeling is a lot of it will be driven both towards distraction and the power memes. The distraction in high places, along with power issues between partners, more both in famous romantic partnerships, but also the business and industry. And it's interesting that above copyright issue came up actually between something with Playboy and their images, or one of that type of magazine. So again, we have even sexuality linking there. The Gable rune stave, it's also about gifts and giving and reciprocal relationships, which includes treaties, which is another reason I mentioned the treaties and partnerships being in the news in the earlier part of this reading. Of course, there's also the high probability with this rune's energy that we may have the rather pleasant distraction of, say, a happy wedding or proposal in the news that might also serve as a pleasant distraction. It's at least positive and more lighthearted. So, Prince Harry or any other famous person, if you're reading this or listening to my show and thinking of proposing, this would be a good month to do so. And the same is true for everybody out there. If you're in a romantic relationship and it seems to be time to settle down. The Anshu's rune stave is complex, but is usually translated mouth, and is all about communications and speaking. There are also associations with this stave to the god Odin, whose wisdom and craftiness are well known, as is his joy in stirring things up a bit, especially if they might lead to the creation of conflict, and the potential for more heroes being made. Yep, that's the Odinic perspective. Let's have war and battles and conflicts. That's a great thing. He's not exactly associated with peace. That would be Freyr, even though Freyr also has warlike aspects. It's more defensive war, whereas Odin is just not at all averse to making life a lot more interesting. So, communication in marriage or communication over gifts is likely to be a factor in these already existing energies, mixes leading towards potential for personal power grabs, and again, that general me first, or my country first, my tribe first, my family first type of energy. Well, such protectionism isn't always bad. Of course, we want to go with what is best for our own family, or even our own nation. That makes sense. When it goes overboard and becomes especially deceptive, things can get a bit dangerous. The Anshu's energy could act a bit like a child, knowing which buttons to push by saying just the right things to sit back and watch their now manipulated parents explode. You ever do that as a kid? I know if I say this to mommy and then this to daddy, they're going to get mad. And it's going to be fun. You know, but the main thing is you hopefully don't suffer for it. In this way, the child has the real power making in the situation. Though being small and immature, they may be surprised, but eventually the entire mess does come back to drop on their head when mommy and daddy figure out what's going on. More to the point, this is a month to watch for issues of communications, public speaking, public voices, and in generally a sense of people getting there, wanting to get their message out there. And again, sometimes it'll be really clear and spoken, but there's a lot of cross energy making that possibly getting confused. This will be both positive and negative, getting out the message, and individuals can use this energy in a positive way to make their voices and points heard. Just be real sure you know what your message really is, and your real motives for doing so because of all that cross-information and energy. Self-deception is going to be a big problem this month. That doesn't mean that everybody has to participate or that you will necessarily be deceived. It just means be aware of this potential, and it's a really good idea to take steps to avoid it. Analyze what you're doing, what you're saying, what you want. Make sure that you understand your real motives. Finally, we have Tiwaj, and this rune stave is usually translated as Chu or Sky Father, the very ancient European Sky Father god, who, if you deal with the traditional Norse, which that's the system we're using with the runes, that's the closest concept they had to something like the modern idea of God the Father. So we've got that kind of overall, Lord God image there. The rune is also about the law, justice, court cases, disputes, and even as a divine justice in the sense of, the god or the gods coming down and deciding things, which may not be the same as the human sword, which we really have to understand with this rune. The type of justice is not always something that people necessarily would totally understand, particularly modern people. This rune is another reason I emphasize the potential for law-breaking or dishonesty in some of the earlier cards, because it suggests ultimately this behavior may start to be judged. Just as there's a lot of energy out there for essentially unjust behavior, there's also strong energy out there towards the actions of justice or occurring and taking place. On the current events news side of things, this suggests more court actions, high-profile legal stories, and other similar things will continue to make the headlines. But there's also a sense of this room, as I said, of that divine justice. In terms of whatever the decision is that occurs earlier in the month, whatever the world decides and results in that big death and transformation, that decision itself will ultimately be judged, as will those who make the decisions and carry them out. They do not get off scot-free. They will end up, eventually, maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but eventually they too will face judgment for those decisions, good or bad. What I'm not sure exactly is when that major decision will be. As I said, it may be this month, it may be a little more into next month. Whatever it is, I think it will affect jobs and unemployment, probably in a big way. And it's got to be large enough that it kind of affects the whole world tree. And some of the branches are likely to be more affected than others. My monkey mind thinks this may be some decision about current world economic system or something that the general topical area. But I don't see any rune staves or cards other than the work card that point this out directly. So that may be something we need to look for in the individual coming weeks when we look to see the energies are coming to light for more individuals rather than just a month as a whole. But altogether, and I'll go into this more in the second half of the show, I think that we're looking at a lot of this being fairly clear, at least by the end of this year. We may know much sooner, like around by the end of October, what all of this means, but it should certainly have sorted out by then. Okay, I'm going to take a break. Go get yourself a cup of tea, sit down, and because that's a basic reading that came from the blog. In the second half of the show, I'm going to address some questions and comments that came from my readers, and before I did the show, and I'm going to do a specific reading on what is the nature of that decision. Let's see if we can get a bit more information. But for now, we're going to take a break, and I look forward to rejoining you again in just a few moments here at Cat's Eye on the Future.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Okay, welcome back from the break. At this point, we're going to get to some of the special bits that, as I said, are just for this show. First, I'm going to go over some information I provided on the forums where I cross-post my blog, and some questions and comments came up about how these energies might impact individuals, and later I'll follow this up, as I said, with a special reading about the puzzle decision that I did 2 days after recording and writing out the initial blog post. But first I want to look at a couple of the individual questions, or in one case comments, that people made on the forum and asked about. And the first one had to do with macro versus micro ways these energies might play out. And on the forum, somebody named, I'm going to call A, asked me the question: the big trends and the little trends. We know that something may be happening out there and not really affect us in here. How do you see this macro to micro trending? It will roll over some of us and happen in the big picture only, or are we fated to individually feel all of this on some level or another? So I answered. I thought the big news this month really was the macro trends, but I hope to spend more time on the micro trends for individuals on the weekly readings that I do, and as I said, I decided to do them here at the show as well. The future, I'm hoping to usually have a tidbit or two, like I said on the show, for real interest, and I go into that blah blah blah. But we've already really talked about that, so I don't need to repeat that here. But what I'm going to look for in the decision reading is, my hunch is it has to do with economics, and I'll explain more later, and in some form or fashion. But that could be almost anything on its own, since the large events affects economics in some way. Almost everything does. A lot of it all comes down to economics. So that's the macro stuff. Excuse me. I think on the personal level, though, and this is where it really gets interesting, this month is full of the kind of slightly off and distracting energy issues of work and employment. Both positive and negative. They're going to affect the present for many people. And the marriage rune runes very well for those looking to cement a relationship or to celebrate one that is working, but could also indicate that these other pressures could be difficult for those for whom they're not working. The counter trends towards deception and power grabbing can also adversely affect people, either directly if they're not careful in their own behavior, I mentioned that before the end of the last segment, or because they're impacted by the behavior of others in their lives. People they can't escape from. I'm thinking mostly of family members, your boss, the local county council, the IRS agent. It seems to be really bad time for what I call bantam rooster syndrome, by which usually when I talk about it, I mean a short man who tries to act big. I'm a very small woman. In height, I'm 4'8" tall. And throughout my life, particularly as a teenager and in college, I would often be approached by these young men who thought I would just, for no other reason than the fact that they were short, I would be immediately attracted to them and fall into their arms. And many of them had this extreme need to prove how big they really were. Not all short men have this, but it's fairly common. So that's when I had a bandy rooster as a child that used to walk around on the biggest bad couple in the barnyard, and they just reminded me of that. So that's where it comes from. However, bandy rooster syndrome has other aspects than just short men acting big in a not necessarily nice way. In this case, I think bantam rooster syndrome is anyone, male or female, who has a scrap of power, metaphorically trying to pee, like the cat in that picture card, pee their way into taking more power, or at least making themselves look as if they have more power and more room. In other words, they're trying to make themselves puff up and look really big, like my bantam rooster. So this is a good time to avoid or try not to dispute with these individuals who have a little personal power, especially if they have little kingdoms, like, again, the school dean, the supermarket manager, the aforementioned IRS employee, because the energy is out there for them not only to be literally pissy about it, but if they're so inclined to be extremely defensive, to the point of using intentional deceptions or even theft, real or of your reputation to maintain control or what they perceive of control as the area. In other words, this is not a month you're likely to win. If you have to, you can take them on if you're not left any choice, but be aware of the fact that their claws are going to be dug in a lot more than usual, and you're likely to just make yourself a target. So, while there are times to stand up for yourself and be pushy, this is probably not a good time unless you just simply have no other choice. There's some really good aspects to these energies, though, especially, again, for individuals. It's just bullying aspects of the energy I already mentioned. I really don't like them. And this, as I said before, this may be a month when some important decisions do come to a head, and they have to be made. And when or if that happens on a personal level, I think that, again, this is a continuation of last month, where people who follow my blog know that for at least a month now, the energies have been out there to use your brain over your gut. It doesn't mean you ignore your gut reaction. It's just that it's a good time period to evaluate a gut reaction and give it a serious reality check with your brain and make sure it matches reality, and then go for it if things match. Because, again, there's going to be this real temptation for self-delusion and seeing things my way or the highway. And everyone's going to have this energy working on them. I mean, even people with the best will in the world. You need to just fact check yourself before you make a move. This is also probably not the best month to go for your dreams, because there's just so many potential nightmares and delusions out there. I don't mean you stop dreaming or planning a new business or a course of study or a new project. Just be cautious in making any serious moves that you don't have to. But if decisions again are forced on you, then do make them, because otherwise they're going to get made for you. It's very complex energy this month, where it's not exactly that you're hanged if you do and hanged if you don't, but there is a certain amount of that. So again, the use of the monkey mind is actually appropriate this month, as well as the gut feelings. You want to work on both of them. And that pesky death card, that means a lot of transformation and the potential for the final ending of a lot of things out there. These things can be positive. I mean, in my other major deck that I use a lot of the time, death card is actually called transformation, because a great deal of the time that's what the card means, and death can be very confusing to people and it's scary, especially on a personal level. But the final ending of something, someone, and some situation or relationship, well, it can be painful at the time. It needs to end in something for something better to begin. So again, when you have a month with a lot of death energy on a personal level, looking for things in your life that need terminating, that need ending, that, like ending a bad habit, like if you want to. This is a good month to try to quit smoking, for example. Just be aware of the real reasons you're doing it, and do you need it? Because again, there's that self-deceptive energy. But overall, it's a good time to transform things. A perfect example of this much energy in that area would be the person who loses a job, especially with the work card. It's very painful. They lose a job at the start of the month, but they get a better one at the end. But the middle of the month is really rocky and painful. Now, usually readings in life are not usually that easy, but that's a good practical example of understanding this energy. Okay, this was followed by a comment from someone named Eve, who basically wanted to know about the communications in Mercury in retrograde. And I'm going to keep this one rather short. I'm not going to read my whole reply here, but basically it's a good question, because the mouth card does sort of represent voice and communications. And Mercury retrograde is an astrological concept that you see in astrology. It's a time period when the planets appear to go backwards. Now, we know in modern times that planets don't actually go backwards. They just look that way when you're standing on planet Earth. But from an astrological perspective, people who use this for predicting the future or for understanding things about people, they see this as a time period when Mercury, who's in charge of communications, when it goes backwards, that can make things more difficult. It's believed to cause machines to break down, to cause the internet to have problems. It can even interfere with travel, but particularly it interferes with communications. So we have that going on along with the Ansu's rune. So I think we do this month have to watch for, again, that miscommunication as well as direct communication. So there's going to be that tendency for things to get really fuddled up and not really be as linear or as clear as we would like, and it just kind of adds to all this muddled energy. Now, I'm not an astrologer. I'm hoping at some point to team up with an astrologer occasionally when I do these shows, because I think it's very interesting, and I do have a close friend who will sometimes tell me, oh yes, that card makes sense because today Moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars. But since I'm not an astrologer, I have a little bit of understanding, probably a little more than the average lay person, but it's not my field. And I think it's very interesting that very often the cards of the day or the cards of the week or the cards of the month pick up on some of the same energies that astrologers attribute to the planets. But anyway, just be aware, as E asked about, that this is going to be a month when, on top of all the other stuff, communications, which are going to be a strong theme, may get a bit jumbled. Okay, now, finally, I decided to do a top-up reading for this show. And I wanted to know what the nature of the puzzle decision was, or at least see if we could get some other information out of the cards and runes. And unfortunately, once again, they didn't directly answer the question fully, but the cards gives us some very interesting hints about the type of decision or what may be going on, the pattern to look for the next few weeks. Now, I asked the question, what are the main energies concerning the decision that must be made that came up in the overall September 2016 reading, aka we're specifically reading about the puzzle card. And I did a shorter reading on this and just lifted side cards and runes to make it simpler and not bring it out forever. But I still think we get a really good idea of what's going on here. They were pretty clear. And even though there was still nothing specifically economic in nature about this decision, I still have an inner hunch that at least part of this will involve macroeconomics along with work. There was just so many hints there. It may also seem or appear to be about something else on the surface at least, and I'll go into that in a minute. A lot of times things are not just one subject only, but again, I still feel the economics are important. Okay, that said, the first card I got was the Sage. The Sage card shows a wise old man both learning from his books he's studying and writing in his own book for future generations. He's also teaching. The main meaning of this card is usually wisdom, though in this case I'm drawn more to the concept of wise and learned minds, or theoretically wise and learned minds, trying to figure something out or produce a path forward, hopefully after some intense study. In other words, they're looking at the situation and they're trying to figure out a solution. It also has an air of trying to solve real-world problems from an academic perspective, or from the closed study that this old man is sitting in. You want good and wise, probably older people studying and helping to make a real-world decision. But decisions made based only on information from books, or the opinions of, say, people at a university, or sort of, ivory tower, as they used to say, they may not match the real-world observations very well, and that can cause issues, or it may not play out as expected. I think it's particularly true of economics, but it's true in a lot of subject matter. Anyway, my hunch is that the puzzle decision is being puzzled out right now by these, quote, wise old men, unquote. I'm sure there are women involved too, but the image of wise old men is the image I got in my mind psychically, and it suggests to me the decision is either male-dominated, or at least that wise may be a matter of opinion. I mean, it's this kind of rather patriarchal, hands down, the old professor type energy. And I really feel that way because the father card is next. And it's like a pattern in a row. We've got the wise old man, or supposedly wise old man, in his ivory tower or his study. And we have the father card in the world standing next to a much younger man, probably his son, a teenager, or a 12-year-old, to shoot a bow and arrow. He's not only teaching them how to shoot, but he's pointing the direction and telling them where they ought to shoot it. Again, this is a rather masculine, male-dominated energy. It doesn't have to be about men, but it's that kind of direct control. It's almost as if the middle-aged father is showing and pointing and leading the young man to go in the direction that the grandfather has set out. Like the grandfather makes the decision, the father does the teaching and the directing, and then it's the kid, which we'll get to in a moment. It also suggests a use of authority, this card does, and direction. The son may be learning to hunt or fight, we can't tell from the card. He may be going to use that bow and arrow defensively, or he may be being trained to be a warrior and kill in battle, we just can't tell, but the father is teaching him whatever it is he's learning. But we don't know if he's being encouraged at this point. We know that he's not being encouraged to think for himself yet. He's being told what to do and exactly where he's being instructed to point things by the older father figure. Again, this comes off very much as do what we tell you as an answer to the puzzle. Finally, as like a stair step, we have the Fool card. In the side card deck, this is a very young man, a little older than the one learning the bow and arrow, but not by much, maybe 17, 18. He's setting out on his own life journey, totally unafraid and ready for new adventures. It's a picture on the card. It's almost as if there's a story in the cards here, that 3 steps I said. We have Grandpa giving the directions and hoping for the solution to work. We have the father who shows the way and instructs the young man on the direction he should go. And finally, then, the young man is let loose to take his own journey into the unknown. Now, this card is called the Fool, because the young man is too young and inexperienced to have a clue about what he's really facing. In some ways, he's considered like a holy fool, especially in good aspects, who greets the unknown with a calm and even happy air, because he doesn't really have any idea of what's coming anyway, and on some versions of this card, he may even be about to run off a cliff, but he can't see that, so he's just playing the flute and walking along with his dog, and he's happy as Larry for the moment. But nobody really knows whether he goes off the cliff or runs into a tree or goes forward on the path that all works out fine, because it's unknown territory. These three cards together suggest to me that an attempt will be made by wise heads who will want to solve the puzzle. But it will be done as a sort of top-down and authority-driven attempt to implement something but the ultimate solution will still have to be let go eventually. At some point, they have to let it go and let it sink or swim on its own merits. And this will mean entering a new and uncharted territory or situation, which may or may not wind up to be a foolish choice. One which could work out with the bumps along the way. I mean, it may be fine, or it could take everything in the world sort of like right off a cliff. And, so okay, we got that from the cards. What do we get from the runes? Well, we have the Athala rune for homeland, and we have a Sansuj again, or mouth of communication. This is why I thought communication was so important in the overall reading. Athala itself, the rune, is interesting because it's also associated with Odin. Remember Odin? And also with the concept of Greater Germany. And that goes back to about the 19th century German revivalists. That's not just my idea, but this idea somehow Athala and the homeland and the great German folk, which kind of got taken over by the National Socialists, but it doesn't change the basic energy just because somebody used it in an unfortunate pattern. So I often read this rune as signifying the EU, which is essentially Greater Germany, in most current events readings, or many current events readings, excuse me. Is also about the homeland itself. I mean, both your personal home and hearth, as well as an individual's nation state, or their clan or their extended family. This concept of the homeland. The rune in this position in this reading also suggests to me that decision impacts everyone on that basic home level, with perhaps a special twist when it comes to the EU in terms of Greater Germany, and hints of homeland security, so-called, in the United States. I definitely felt that with this when I pulled this. Finally, the following rune, the Ansujer mouth rune, repeats that concept in the larger reading about communication. It's the same rune. This time, though, it's about the decision itself, a sort of speaking forth to try to make it happen. That may be the loud declaration energy we saw in the original reading. And again, this rune is also seriously linked to Odin. Both of them are. So we have this double Odinic whammy when it comes to this decision. The Sage card itself, back in the first part of the reading, could be a third hint of this, because Odin is often portrayed as a wise old man, with one whose advice is often not exactly what it seems at first, which you always have to be careful with Odin on that mark. Overall, I'm sticking with my inner gut feeling here, even though it's not totally an inner gut feeling month. But I really do think that the ultimate topic of the puzzle is probably macroeconomics in some way. Though with all the Odin imagery, it could also involve war or conflict, both physical, like real-world armies and battles, or symbolic, like diplomacy, or even economic warfare, if I'm getting this energy correct. We may not actually see tanks going at each other, but you could see people playing games with currency or markets or trade or something. Of course, economic warfare and battles can easily tip over into the other areas, and this entire puzzle reading to me looks like an attempt on the part of the quote-unquote wise men to try to direct the future with some hands-on directing, and the outcome is really totally unknown, as the Fool card said, but it may set up an entirely new world situation. It will probably result in the ending of something. We just don't know what that something is. The impacts are likely to be felt at home by most people on the micro level, and especially in the US and EU, both the micro and the macro level, I think. And I'm also feeling a little bit towards Asia. I really am kind of like getting the whole world here. What I feel is like the bigger economic power centers and banking are where some of this is really going to impact first. Eventually it all trickles down, but it's decisions that are made on that level. Look for this decision to be communicated far and wide, like broadcasted, there will be no escaping a message itself, easily anyway. Though what eventually morphs into that decision is anybody's guess. So, to sum everything up here, things look to be rather fast-moving and interconnected over the next few weeks. Since this reading is late in September, it may spread out for the month of October, like I said. I rather suspect a lot of these energies are going to do just that. I think it's that now card, which, again, I forgot to do a lot of in the beginning of this show, that gives us a time marker, especially with all the fall and harvest imagery. For weekly energy updates, again, please check my blog. It probably won't be every week this month because of personal travel and commitments, but I will do my best to check in at least once or twice to see how the energies of September are intersecting with the entire month. I'm really looking forward to having this show back on the air on a regular basis, and expect to try again, as I said, for 2 shows a month, at least until the end of the year. The first one will usually be the card reading, unless something really spectacular or interesting comes up that requires an interview. And then the second show will either be a topical show or an interview of some sort. Once the station is up and running again fully, again, as I said, I can decide in 2017 what the best way forward is. But meanwhile, I've given you a lot to think about, and I've had a lot to think about. That's one reason it took 3 or 4 days to get the show recorded, because there was just so much to process and so many different things going on. Not all times are like this. I do have to say that. There are times when we always have a few different energies going on, but there are times when things are much less at cross purposes. This is a time period, I think this whole fall, when a lot of things are kind of at cross purposes. So, if you can, I think it would be a really good idea to check in on the weekly readings, because how the energies of a particular week intersect with the larger energies may affect very much how your life and current events are going on that particular week, because we have to have both of them in consideration. But as I said, I'm really glad everybody tuned in, glad everybody back. I want to thank you all for joining the show for this month, and I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And until this time, I want to say good night from Cat's Eye on the Future.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.